To make sense of all this, we're joined by Ken Kies. He's the managing director of the Federal Policy Group, which provides advice on tax policy before Congress, the Treasury, and the IRS. All right, I want to ask you about what stands out most to you, what the president's unveiled so far.
Well, what stands out most is that the Gang of Six has actually put out a document that outlines where they want to go on tax reform. They've been working on this since February. So this is the first really big step, and it lays out the big picture: rates, corporate, individual, what they want to do with respect to the estate tax, what they want to do with respect to itemized deductions, like eliminating the deductibility of state and local taxes, which will be controversial for the so-called blue states. But this is the first big step forward in a process that's going to take a lot of steps beyond today. But it's clearly finally putting tax reform seriously in play.
So you say it's seriously in play. I want to look at the breakdown here. In the past, the president's pushed for a 15% corporate tax rate. Now it looks like he's proposing a 20%. How significant is that?
Well, you know, the current top corporate rate is 35. The average in the OECD, which is where all of our U.S. multinationals are competing, is around 22.5%. The big argument on corporate tax reform has been for years now that our guys are at a competitive disadvantage. So if we can get down to 20%, at least it gives them a fighting chance. 15% would have been very ambitious and very expensive. Generally speaking, the rule of thumb that for every 1% that you reduce the corporate tax, it costs $100 billion over 10 years. So cutting it from 35 to 20 costs $1.5 trillion. Taking it all the way to 15 would have been another $500 billion. So getting it down to 20 is a pretty good step in terms of making U.S. multinationals competitive.
Ken, do you buy that logic that if you cut back and give the wealthy corporate community a large tax cut, that this is going to help the economy?
Well, the one thing we know for sure is what's happened over the last 5 to 10 years, and that is one U.S. multinational after another has been purchased by a foreign company. And once that happens, the headquarters jobs are gone and they never come back. So the reason that people are advocating for making U.S. multinationals, corporations competitive is that we want to eliminate the incentive to have foreigners buy U.S. companies. And we've seen one after another purchased.
But Ken, isn't that exactly what Trump has come forward saying? We want to bring jobs back to America, companies back here. We don't want to give them an incentive to be able to flourish abroad. We want to help this country by helping businesses. But isn't he then now financing, helping to support, as you mentioned, these corporations that are being bought out by other countries?
No. If you reduce the top U.S. corporate rate to 20%, the attractiveness of foreign entities buying U.S. companies largely goes away. I'm
sorry, I misunderstood you. I thought you said that it does not go away.
No. If you reduce the corporate rate so our guys are competitive against Europeans,
yes,
then the incentive to buy U.S. companies and take them out of the United States doesn't exist like it does today.
So you buy this logic that it will help?
Absolutely. And most every tax lawyer and tax economist does as well.
So when Trump is proposing consolidating the numbers, when you look at the individual tax brackets from 7 to 3, what benefit do you think that could provide?
Well, it adds a little degree of simplification. The 7 brackets, frankly, isn't all that complicated because most people, when they calculate their tax liability, they just look at a table. But at least it helps people be able to understand our tax system a little better. I know that Congressman Brady, who's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax writing committee of the House, would actually like to get our individual tax system simple enough that people could actually prepare their return on a one page that they might actually be able to understand themselves. And simplifying the rate structure is just part of that attempt to get some real simplification.
And is that realistic?
Oh, yeah. No, this is very doable. And, you know, there's going to be, look, like, we haven't done a major tax reform in 31 years, since 1986, and there's a reason. It's not easy. But there is a pretty strong feeling, at least in the Republicans in Congress who are in control of Congress, that tax reform now becomes their number one priority, with health care really being put to the side, at least for the time being. And tax reform does not carry the same emotional baggage that health care reform does. So my own personal view and the view of many is that it will be easier to get done, which is not necessarily to say it will be easy, but it will certainly be easier because it doesn't have the kind of emotional baggage, as I said, that healthcare carries.
So what do you think, if you're a betting man, what are the odds this gets through?
My view is the odds that it gets through before the midterm elections or next year are at least 60 to 80%. The challenge of getting it done this year is real because the calendar is not their friend. But I believe that the probability of us seeing a tax cut enacted into law before the midterm elections of next year is very high.
Okay, Ken, you follow this very closely. If there was one thing that Congress could do differently to help reform the tax code, I know they're trying for a multi-prong approach here. What would that one thing be that could really make a difference for America?
Well, frankly, being very transparent about the process so that people feel like they actually understand what's happening is very important. And today's release is a first step in that direction. What's very important is that as this thing goes to the first tax writing committee of the House, the Ways and Means Committee, it'll be done in public. It'll be an open markup. So people will have a chance to actually listen and watch and hopefully understand the decisions that are being made. To me, that's the most important thing because we need the buy-in of the public in order to do something this big.
All right, Ken Kies, thank you for breaking it all down. Ken, with the Federal Policy Group, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.